The coffee shop on the corner of Redwood and Fifth had been there for 37 years, and in all that time, nobody had ever caused quite as much commotion as the girl who walked through the door on a Tuesday morning in November. She was maybe 16, maybe younger. It was hard to tell beneath the layers of grime and the oversized army jacket that swallowed her whole. Her hair, once dark brown and probably beautiful, was matted into something closer to rope. Her sneakers had a hole in the left toe that she'd tried to cover with a strip of duct tape, and the strip had peeled back, curling away from the canvas like a sad little flag of surrender. She stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the warmth of the shop wash over her like something she'd forgotten existed. Steam from the espresso machines curled through the air. Christmas music played softly from a speaker behind the counter, even though it was only November 14th, because the owner, Patricia Crane, believed in starting the holiday season early. The smell of cinnamon and coffee and something baking in the back reached the girl's nostrils, and she closed her eyes for just a second. Just 1 second of something that wasn't cold. Then she opened them and scanned the room. Most of the tables were full. Laptops and lattes, morning meetings, a mother with a toddler who kept dropping a stuffed rabbit and picking it up again. In the far corner, a man in a business suit was on his phone, jabbing his finger at the air as he made some point that seemed incredibly important to him. The girl moved toward the counter. She had 17 cents in her pocket. She knew exactly how much because she'd counted it 3 times already that morning, sitting on the steps of the public library while she waited for it to open. 17 cents. Not enough for anything. Not even close. "Can I help you?" The teenager behind the counter had braces and a practiced smile. "Could I?" The girl started, then stopped. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Could I just have a cup of hot water? Please." The counter kid hesitated. Looked at her the way people had been looking at her for the past 3 weeks. That quick inventory, the assessment that took about 2 seconds and ended with the person either looking away entirely or looking at her with a kind of helpless pity. "We don't really," he started. "I'll pay for it." She held out the 17 cents on her palm. A dime, a nickel, 2 pennies. I'm really cold." The counter kid looked at the coins. Looked at her. Opened his mouth. "Give her a large hot chocolate." The voice came from behind her. Low, unhurried, carrying the kind of authority that comes not from position but from something harder to define. The kind of voice that had learned not to need to repeat itself. The girl spun around. He was enormous. That was the first thing. Not tall exactly, though he was that too, but enormous in the way of someone who takes up space confidently, completely without apology. He wore a leather jacket so old and worn it had developed its own personality, covered in patches and pins that told a story she didn't know how to read. His arms were covered in tattoos from the wrist up, disappearing into his sleeves, and his gray-streaked beard had been around long enough to count as a permanent feature. His hands, wrapped around a coffee cup, were the size of small plates. He wasn't looking at her with pity. That was the second thing. He was looking at her like she was a person. "I don't need charity," the girl said. Her chin came up. She'd learned that, at least, how to stand straight even when everything was falling apart. "It's not charity." He pulled out a chair at his table, a corner table, she noticed, with a view of the whole room and his back to the wall. "It's a hot chocolate. Sit down." I don't know you. No, he agreed. You don't. He took a sip of his coffee. My name is Ray. Raymond Earl Stafford. I ride a 2019 Harley-Davidson Road King that needs new brakes and is going to cost me about $800 I don't want to spend. I am 54 years old. I have been a member of the same motorcycle club for 22 years. I take my coffee black and I don't put sugar in it because life is bitter enough and I like to be reminded of that in small doses. I am not going to hurt you. You can sit here and drink something hot, or you can walk back out into the cold. Either way is fine. He picked up his coffee again. The girl stood there for 4 seconds. She counted later, when she was trying to reconstruct the moment. For seconds of standing in a warm coffee shop with 17 cents in her hand and a man who just offered her a chair and a story about brake repairs. Then she sat down. Her name was Vivian Cole, but she hadn't told anyone that in weeks, so when Ray eventually asked, gently, after the hot chocolate arrived and she'd wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into it like it might show her something, she hesitated. You don't have to tell me, he said. Vivian, she said. But people call me Viv. All right, Viv. He didn't make a big deal out of it. Just filed it away. How long? She looked up. How long what? How long you been out here? It wasn't a question exactly. More like an acknowledgement. He already knew the answer was in the range of weeks or months. He was just asking for the number. 3 weeks, she said. And 2 days. Ray nodded slowly. He didn't say anything right away, and she appreciated that more than she could explain. Everyone else who'd ever tried to help her, the shelter volunteers, the school counselor that one time, her aunt for those 2 terrible weeks, they all rushed to fill silences. They'd say, "Oh, sweetie," or "That must be so hard," or, worst of all, "Have you tried calling your parents?" Ray just nodded. Let the number exist in the air between them. "Cold night last night," he said finally. "Yeah." He wrapped his hands around his mug and looked out the window. The morning traffic was building up on Redwood. A city bus groaned past, belching exhaust. A woman in a yellow coat walked a small white dog that kept stopping to sniff at everything. "Where'd you sleep?" Viv hesitated. She'd learned not to share that information. It was dangerous, strategically. Let people know your spot and you'd find it occupied. Or worse. But Ray seemed to understand the hesitation, and he waved it off. You don't need to say. I'm not going to show up. Just asking because the forecast last night was 28 degrees and I want to make sure you're not. He stopped. Started again. I want to know you're okay. I'm not okay, Viv said. The words came out flat, factual. She hadn't meant to say them. They just fell out, the way truth does sometimes when you're too tired to keep holding it up. Ray met her eyes. No, he agreed. Probably not. But you're alive. You walked in here under your own power. You told me your name. That's 3 things you've got going. She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't look away. Most people looked away. Why are you being nice to me? She asked. The question was genuine. She'd given up trying to be subtle about things like this. You didn't have the luxury of social manners when you were sleeping in parking garages. Ray thought about it. Actually thought about it, which was different from the automatic of course. Sweetie, I just want to help that she'd gotten from others. My daughter would be 19 this year, he said. He picked up his coffee, set it down, looked at the window. She died when she was 14. Leukemia. Viv didn't say anything. What was there to say? She used to get cold easily, Ray continued. Even when it was warm. Always walking around in sweaters. Used to steal my jacket all the time. He almost smiled. Every time I see a kid on the street, a young person who should be warm somewhere and isn't, I think about that. About how somebody probably loves you. How somebody probably has your jacket somewhere and wishes they could give it back. He stopped talking and took a long drink of coffee. Viv felt something crack in her chest. Not break, crack. Like ice in spring, when it shifts. My mom's dead too, she said. She hadn't said that out loud in 3 weeks. Car accident. 6 months ago. I'm sorry. My dad. She stopped. How to explain her father? How to compress the last 6 months into something another person could understand? He kind of stopped existing after she died. Like he just turned off. And then he started drinking and things got... She shook her head. Things got bad, Ray said quietly. Yeah. He didn't push. Just sat there with her in the bad of it. The Christmas music changed to White Christmas, and Viv thought about last Christmas, when her mother was still alive and they'd made sugar cookies and burned half of them, and her mother had laughed so hard she'd cried, real tears, saying they should have been bakers just so they could fail spectacularly at it every year. She became aware that she was crying. Not sobbing, just leaking. Tears running down her face in 2 straight lines. She wiped them with her sleeve. Ray pulled a clean bandana from his jacket pocket, folded in perfect thirds, which struck her as unexpectedly precise for a man who looked like he wrestled bears for fun, and slid it across the table. Keep it, he said. She stayed for 2 hours. Ray bought her a blueberry muffin and another hot chocolate when the first one ran out, and then a third when the second one ran out, each time doing it in such a matter-of-fact way that it never felt like charity, just like the natural course of events at a table where someone was clearly cold and hungry and the other person happened to have a wallet. He asked questions, but not the invasive ones. He asked where she was from originally, Ohio, a small town she described as the kind of place that was fine if you were fine and suffocating if you weren't. He asked what she liked, not what she was good at or what she wanted to be, but what she actually liked. The distinction was strange, and it made her stop and think. Reading, she said finally. I like reading, and I used to paint. Watercolors. My mom taught me. What kind of things? Landscapes mostly. Trees. Water. She liked painting birds. Viv wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. She had this whole series she was working on. Sparrows. She said sparrows were the most important bird because everybody ignores them. Because they're common. But they're actually incredibly complicated up close if you actually look. Ray said nothing, but he was listening with his whole body, the way very few people ever listened. I think about that a lot, Viv continued, and she wasn't sure why she was telling him this, but the words kept coming. About how she saw complicated things in stuff that everyone else walked past. She was like that with people too. She could always see more in them than they saw in themselves. She paused. I'm not like that. I'm not good at seeing things in people. That's not true, Ray said. How would you know? Because you looked at me and sat down, he said simply. Most people don't. At 10:15, Ray's phone buzzed on the table and he glanced at it, made a small sound of resignation. I have to be somewhere, he said. He looked at Viv across the table and she braced herself for the thing that always came next, the awkward pivot, the handing off of a pamphlet for a shelter, the well-meaning dismissal. Instead, he said, Can I ask you something direct? Sure. Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight? She held his gaze. The library closes at 9. I usually find something after that. That's not what I asked. No, she said. I don't have somewhere safe to go. Ray was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window again, that thoughtful look that she was already coming to recognize as the thing he did when he was working through a problem that mattered. I'm going to give you my number, he said. And I'm going to tell you something, and you can do whatever you want with it. He pulled a card from his jacket, a simple card, just a name and a phone number. R. Stafford. There's a place on Monroe Street called the Iron Door Diner. It's a diner. We own it, the club, my club. We run it for people who need a meal. No questions, no judgment, no intake forms. You walk in, you sit down, you eat. They're open from 7 in the morning until 10 at night. He slid the card across the table. Second thing, he said. My number's on there. You can call it any time. I mean that. 2 in the morning, doesn't matter. If you're in trouble, real trouble, you call that number. Viv looked at the card. You don't know me. No, Ray agreed. But I knew someone like you once. And I didn't have a number to give her. He picked up his coffee, found it empty, set it back down. That's something I've been trying to fix ever since. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, pulled on gloves that were thick with leather and wear. You're a smart kid, Viv, he said. You'll figure this out. But you don't have to figure it all out alone. He dropped a $50 bill on the table. She started to protest, and he held up one hand, a gesture so final it stopped her words cold. Coffee money, he said. For the next time it's cold. He walked out. Through the window, she watched him move to a Harley parked at the curb. He pulled on a helmet and sat for a moment, and she couldn't see his face, but she got the impression he was sitting still on purpose, letting himself be still for a moment. Then he started the engine and rode away, and the sound of it was low and steady, and she watched until she couldn't see him anymore. She looked down at the card in her hand. R. Stafford. She put it in the pocket of the army jacket, pressed it flat with her thumb. She went to the Iron Door Diner that evening. She stood outside for 10 minutes first, watching people go in and out. It was exactly what Ray had described, an old diner, the kind with a sign in neon that buzzed slightly, booths with red vinyl seats worn smooth with years, a counter with round stools. Through the window she could see a woman in her 60s moving between tables with a coffee pot. A couple of men at the counter eating soup. A young family in a booth near the back. Nothing threatening. Everything ordinary. She went in. The woman with the coffee pot looked up. Her name tag said Georgie. She had a face that had lived a lot and a smile that made you feel like you'd been expected. "Honey, sit anywhere you like," Georgie said. Just that. No examination, no assessment, no subtle look up and down. Just sit anywhere you like, the way you'd say it to anyone. Viv sat in a booth near the window. Georgie brought her coffee without being asked, and a menu, and when Viv said she'd have whatever was least expensive, Georgie said the beef stew was good tonight and brought her a bowl so large it was practically geography. Viv ate the whole thing. When she was finished, Georgie brought her a piece of apple pie and said Ray had called ahead and the pie was included. Viv stared at the pie. A lump formed in her throat so sudden and so massive that she had to breathe through her nose for a moment to keep from completely embarrassing herself in the middle of a diner. She ate the pie too. When she stood to leave, Georgie appeared beside her as if by instinct. "You come back tomorrow," Georgie said. "Not a question. I make biscuits on Wednesdays." "Okay," Viv managed. "And honey." Georgie pressed something into her hand. A key, she realized. A small silver key on a plain ring. "There's a bathroom on the side of the building, outside door. It's got a shower in it. Nobody uses it at night. You can use it whenever you need to." Viv looked at the key. "I can't." "You can," Georgie said firmly, and her voice was gentle but left no room for argument. "You absolutely can. Now go on." 6 weeks passed. Viv became a fixture at the iron door, first in the evenings, then in the mornings too. She used the shower. She sat in the warmth and read books she borrowed from the library. She could get a card with just a state ID, which she had, which she'd managed to keep through the entire disaster of the last 6 months like some kind of talisman. She met other people connected to Ray's club, though she didn't know at first that's what they were. A man named Bobby who came in every Thursday and always had a joke that was terrible and knew it and delivered it anyway with the pride of someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. A woman named Sandra who drove a truck and brought supplies to the diner on Tuesdays and always sat down for coffee and to talk to whoever needed talking to. She didn't see Ray for 2 weeks. She thought maybe that was that, the one good moment of one good morning, a story that had reached its natural end. Then on a Thursday evening, he came in. He didn't make a production of it. He just sat down across from her booth, asked Georgie for the usual, and looked at Viv. "How's it going?" he asked. "Better," she said. It was true, technically. She'd found a place to sleep. A young woman named Patricia who worked at the library had, after some carefully navigated conversation, offered Viv the use of her couch in exchange for help watching her 2 kids 2 evenings a week. It wasn't permanent. Patricia had been clear about that, and Viv respected the honesty. But it was a roof and warmth, and the kids were 6 and 8 and completely insane in the best possible way. "Better's good," Ray said. He wrapped his hands around his coffee. "I've been thinking," Viv said. She'd been working up to this for days, and the directness of him made her feel like she could be direct too. "About what you said that first day. About your daughter." He waited. "I wanted to say, I don't know what that's like. Losing a kid. But I know what it's like to lose your mom, and I think," she paused, "I think you probably carry that around every day and it doesn't get lighter, it just gets more familiar. And I wanted to say that I'm sorry. That I see that." that I don't think you should have to carry it alone." Ray was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different. Still low, still steady, but with something underneath it that wasn't there before. "Her name was Josephine," he said. "We called her Josie." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "She was exactly like you. The chin-up thing you do when you're scared. She had that." He looked at his coffee. "She used to read everything. Finish books in a day. We used to fight over the light bill because she'd read until 3 in the morning and leave every lamp in the house on." Viv smiled. "That sounds like a good fight to have." "Yeah." He almost smiled too. "Yeah, it was." The thing about Ray Stafford was this: he didn't try to fix everything. This was the part that confounded Viv the most, because every adult who'd ever tried to help her had immediately set about constructing solutions. Solutions involved paperwork and phone calls and systems that were, in her experience, designed for people who were almost fine but not quite, not for people who had fallen through all the cracks and were living in the space between systems. Ray brought her coffee and occasionally food and sometimes just sat there reading a newspaper while she read her library book, and that was enough. He didn't ask her every week if she'd called her father. He didn't suggest shelters she'd already tried and rejected. He didn't have a plan for her life waiting in his back pocket. What he did was show up. Consistently. Without drama. Every Thursday evening, and sometimes on other days too, he'd come into the iron door and sit at whichever table she was at, and they'd talk or not talk, and she began to understand, slowly, that showing up without an agenda is the rarest and most valuable thing a person can offer another person. One Thursday, 6 weeks in, he brought someone with him. A man roughly Ray's age, stockier, with close-cropped gray hair and a leather jacket similar to Ray's, though his patches were different. He moved with the particular careful precision of someone managing old injuries. "This is Teddy," Ray said. "He runs a program." Teddy sat down and looked at Viv with the directness Ray had, but different, more methodical, more clinical, though not coldly so. "Ray's told me about you," Teddy said. "About your situation. Not details. Just the general shape of things." "Okay," Viv said carefully. "I run a GED program out of the community center on Warren Street. Evenings and Saturday mornings. We help people who've had interruptions in their education." He folded his hands on the table. "Ray says you're smart. Says you should be in school somewhere." "I'm 17, Viv said. "I can't legally drop out. I just stopped going when everything fell apart." "That happens. The GED program is for people of all ages. But I also have a connection with Jefferson High. I work with their counseling department. They have a re-enrollment program for students who've had to leave due to extenuating circumstances. It includes housing support, meal assistance. It's not perfect, but it's structured." Viv looked at Ray. He was looking at his coffee in the way he did when he'd already said what he had to say and was leaving the rest to her. "You talked to a school about me?" Viv said. "I talked to a school about their program," Ray said carefully. "They don't know your name. I was just asking about the process." She thought about what it would mean. Going back to school. Sitting in a classroom again, trying to look normal when nothing had been normal for 6 months. The other kids who would know or not know, the teachers who'd look at her with that careful, worrying look. She also thought about her mother, who had been a nurse, who had worked incredibly hard for every credential she'd ever earned, who had told Viv 1,000 times that the only thing nobody could take away from you was what you knew. "Can I think about it?" she said. "Take all the time you need," Teddy said. He slid a card across the table. Déjà vu of Ray that first morning. No pressure. Just an option. She took the card. 3 nights later, it snowed. Not gently, not decoratively. A real December snow, the kind that meant business, that arrived at 8 in the evening and had already put 3 inches on the ground by 9. The temperature dropped to 17 degrees. Patricia's couch was safe, but Patricia had family visiting this week, and Viv had quietly arranged to give that space up for a few days. She was in the library when it started. She watched it through the tall windows, the flakes coming down in sheets, and she made the calculation that she always had to make. How bad was it? How long could she wait? What were her options? At 8:45, 20 minutes before closing, her options were as follows. A shelter 4 blocks away where she'd had a bad experience once and dreaded going back. An ATM vestibule on 5th that was somewhat sheltered but not heated, or the parking garage on Clement where she'd spent several nights and which was structurally protected but open enough that the wind still got in. 17 degrees. She looked at the snow. She pulled out Ray's card and stared at it for a minute. Then she put it back. She wasn't in real trouble. She'd managed worse than this. She packed up her bag and went to the parking garage. By midnight, she was shivering so hard she could barely think. She'd layered everything she had, which was 3 shirts and the army jacket and a pair of gloves with the right index finger missing, and she was on the ground level of the garage, pressed into the corner where 2 concrete walls met, and the wind was getting in anyway. At 12:30, she took out Ray's card. She stared at it for another 5 minutes, arguing with herself. Then she called. He answered on the second ring. "Yeah." His voice was clear, not foggy with sleep. Either he hadn't been sleeping or he woke up fast. "It's Viv." She was embarrassed at how her teeth chattered around the words. "I'm sorry to. It's fine, it's the snow." "Where are you?" No hesitation. No "why didn't you call earlier" or "what were you thinking?" Just, "Where are you?" She told him. "Stay there," he said. 20 minutes. She stayed. He made it in 15. He pulled up in a truck. She'd expected the motorcycle, and the truck surprised her. A big dark pickup, practical and ordinary, and the headlights found her in the corner of the garage, and he was out of the cab before the engine was fully off. He walked up to her. He was wearing a heavy jacket, a wool cap. He took one look at her and said, "Can you walk?" "Yes," she said, though the word barely made it out. "All right. Come on." He walked her to the truck, opened the passenger door, got her in. The heat was already running. He'd had it on full during the drive over. She held her hands in front of the vents and didn't say anything, and neither did he for the first 3 minutes, while the warmth worked its way into her fingers, and she stopped shaking quite so violently. "I have a spare room," he said eventually. He said it the way he said most things, not tentatively, not with a lot of qualifications, but also not like it was decided. Just stating a fact and leaving the interpretation up to her. "My house. It has a lock on the door. Nobody goes in there without your say-so." You'd have the run of the kitchen. Viv watched the snow coming down through the windshield. I don't want to be a charity case, she said. You're a kid in a snowstorm at midnight, Ray said. Accepting a room isn't a character flaw. I'm 17. I'm not a kid. You're a person who needed help and called someone instead of suffering alone, which is smarter than most adults I know. He looked at her. That's not charity. That's sense. She thought about her mother. About how her mother would handle this. Not the sentimentality of it, but the practicality. Her mother had been deeply practical. She had believed in accepting help when help was offered, because she had also believed in paying it forward when your turn came. Your turn will come, her mother used to say. It always does. Just make sure you're in a position to answer when it does. Okay, Viv said. Ray nodded. Put the truck in drive. There are rules, he said, pulling out of the garage. Of course. No smoking in the house. I quit 15 years ago and I don't want the temptation. Dishes don't stay in the sink more than a day. If something's wrong, with the room, with anything, you tell me directly. Don't let it build up. Those are reasonable rules, Viv said. Good. He glanced at her. You hungry? I'm always hungry. There's a taqueria on Elm that's open until 2. We'll stop. The house was not what she'd expected. She'd had some vague image of a biker's house, dark, cluttered, the kind of disorganized space that spoke of someone living entirely on their own terms. She hadn't been wrong about the living on own terms part, but she'd been wrong about the rest. The house was small and clean and had a particular sense of order that looked lived in rather than sterile. Books on shelves, organized loosely by subject. A kitchen that had been used and maintained. A dining table with 4 chairs, all mismatched, that somehow worked together. And photographs. The photographs were everywhere, but not in a chaotic or haphazard way. They were carefully placed, carefully preserved in simple frames. Viv noticed immediately that many of them were of the same girl, a girl who grew from about 7 through 14 in the photos, dark-haired, brown-eyed, with her father's straight posture and her own wide, open smile. She understood without asking whose house this had been to them both, and what it meant that he'd kept it exactly like this. The spare room had a single bed with clean sheets. She noticed the sheets weren't dusty, which meant either he used this room sometimes or he prepared it recently, and she suspected the latter, and a window that looked out at the small backyard. There was a desk, a lamp, a hook on the back of the door for hanging things. There's a bathroom across the hall, Ray said from the doorway. Towels in the cabinet. This is perfect, Viv said. She meant it with everything she had. He nodded. Started to leave. Ray. He turned back. Thank you, she said. I know I say that a lot, but I mean it a lot. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't fully name. Not sadness, exactly, though it was adjacent to sadness. More like the feeling of something you thought was gone discovering it was still there. Get some sleep, he said. You're safe here. He pulled the door shut. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment, just stood there in the quiet warmth, and felt something she hadn't felt in 6 months. Safe. She felt safe. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her face in her hands and cried. Really cried, The way she hadn't let herself since the night her father had gotten drunk and said the things he'd said, and she'd packed a bag and walked out the door at 11 at night into a world that turned out to be much colder and much harder than she'd known. She cried until there was nothing left to cry, and then she lay down on the clean bed and slept more deeply than she had in weeks. December unfolded like something cautious, something learning to trust. Viv re-enrolled in school. She didn't make a big announcement about it. She called Teddy, met with the counselor at Jefferson High, sat through the assessment process with a calm she'd had to work hard to manufacture, and 3 weeks after that conversation in the diner, she walked into Jefferson High School for the first time on a Monday morning. The school counselor, a woman named Mrs. Okafor, was brisk and efficient and looked at Viv like she was a problem to be solved, which Viv found she preferred to the looks of theatrical sympathy she'd gotten elsewhere. Mrs. Okafor told her she'd missed enough credits to need to repeat her junior year, told her the re-enrollment program included a weekly check-in, and told her there were people she could talk to if things got hard. "I appreciate that," Viv said. "Good." Mrs. Okafor looked at her over her glasses. "Now, are you safe? Where you're sleeping?" Viv hesitated. The situation with Ray was not simple to explain. She settled for, "I'm staying with someone. An adult who's helping out." "Family?" "Not exactly. A friend." Mrs. Okafor looked at her for a long moment with the expression of someone running a calculation. "If that situation changes, you come directly to me. Not the front office." "Me." "I will," Viv said. The first week of school was brutal. Not because anyone was cruel. In fact, most of the other students barely registered her existence, which was its own kind of mercy, but because being back in a classroom required a kind of sustained performance she'd forgotten how to maintain. The performance of everything is fine. I am a normal person. I have a home and food and a future I can see from here. She came home every day to Ray's house, and Ray was usually there in the evenings, and they'd sometimes eat together at the mismatched table and talk about whatever came up, or they wouldn't talk, or he'd be out and she'd have the house to herself and she'd sit at the kitchen table doing homework with a cup of tea and feel, again and again, the strange profound luxury of safety. She met more of his club, not all at once, but gradually, the way you meet anyone's world when you're spending time in their life. There was a man named Walter who came over one Saturday to watch a game and treated Viv with an easy, uncomplicated friendliness that she realized later was because Ray must have talked to him, must have said, "This person is under my roof, and you treat her accordingly." There was a woman named Christine who ran the Iron Doors books and stopped by one evening to drop something off and stayed for coffee and talked to Viv about school with the informed enthusiasm of someone who'd worked in education. None of them asked her story. None of them pried. They were simply present, the way Ray was present, occupying the space around her without filling it with demands. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, she found Ray in the small room at the end of the hall that she'd assumed was a home office. The door was slightly open. She saw him sitting at a desk, looking at something she couldn't see from the angle, and there was a stillness to him that she recognized from her mother's quiet moments, the stillness of someone alone with grief. She almost walked past. Instead, she knocked lightly on the open door. He looked up. She could see now what he'd been looking at, a drawing, simple pencil on paper, the kind a child makes when they're learning, but you could already see in it the intention, the careful observation. It was a bird. A sparrow, actually. She felt the air go out of her. "Josie drew that," Ray said. He didn't sound caught or embarrassed. just stated it as fact. She had a thing about drawing birds. Said birds were the only animals that existed in 3 places at once: sky, earth, water. That you couldn't put them in just one category. Viv thought about her mother and the sparrow paintings. She thought about how the universe was sometimes unkind and sometimes, rarely, mysteriously, handed you something like this, a thread between one loss and another, a reminder that separate griefs could recognize each other. "My mom used to paint sparrows," she said. Ray looked at her. Really looked at her, the full weight of it. "She said sparrows were the most important bird," Viv continued, "because everyone ignores them. She said they're complicated if you actually look." Ray set down the drawing carefully. Stood up. Said nothing for a moment. "Yeah," he said finally. His voice was quiet, with something she couldn't name but recognized. "Yeah, that's right. Christmas was the hardest day. She'd expected it to be. The day she'd been dreading since November, the first Christmas without her mother, in a stranger's house that was starting to feel less like a stranger's house every day, which made it simultaneously better and worse. Ray hadn't made a production of Christmas. He wasn't someone who made productions of things. But he'd gotten a tree, a small one, a table tree really, sitting on the kitchen counter, and there were a few strings of lights around the window, and when Viv came downstairs on Christmas morning, there was a package on the kitchen table with her name on it in Ray's handwriting. She stood looking at it for a long time. Then she called her father. She'd been building toward this for weeks and hadn't told Ray or anyone else, because she hadn't known what form it would take or whether she'd go through with it. She stood in the kitchen in the early morning light, Ray not yet awake, the tree lights blinking softly, and she dialed the number she'd had memorized since she was 6 years old. It rang 4 times. "Hello." His voice was rough with sleep, or something else. "Dad," she said. "It's Viv." A long silence. "Vivian." Her father's voice broke on the second syllable of her name in a way that told her everything she needed to know about the 6 months without her. She didn't say what she'd planned to say. She'd planned something careful, boundaried, the language of someone protecting themselves. What came out instead was, "Are you okay?" Another silence. "No," her father said. "I'm not okay. I haven't been okay since your mother died. I haven't been okay since you left. I haven't," his voice gave out. "Started again. I've been in a program. Since last month. 31 days sober." She sat down at the kitchen table. 31 days, she said. "I know that's not very many. I know it doesn't fix what I did. I know I said—" He stopped. "The things I said to you, Vivian. The night you left. I wake up every morning and those words are the first thing I hear. I need you to know I didn't mean them. I was drowning and I dragged you under with me, and I will never forgive myself for that." Her eyes were full. She blinked, hard. 31 days is good," she said finally. 31 days is real. Where are you? Are you safe? I called the school. They said you'd re-enrolled, which means—" "I'm safe," she said. "I'm okay. I've had help." "Who? Who's been helping you?" She thought about how to explain Ray to her father. She thought about a motorcycle and a coffee shop and a bandana folded in perfect thirds. She thought about sparrows. "Someone good," she said. "I'll tell you about it. But not right now. Right now I needed to hear your voice." They talked for 40 minutes. By the end, nothing was resolved. Nothing so large could be resolved in 40 minutes, but it had been opened, and that was different from closed, and different was enough. She hung up the phone and sat at the table and heard Ray moving around upstairs, heard his slow, careful footsteps, heard the water running. When he came down, she was still sitting at the table with the unopened package in front of her. He looked at her face, at the redness around her eyes. "Bad call," he said. "No," she said. "Good call. A hard good call." He nodded. "Put the coffee on." "My dad's 31 days sober," she said. Ray turned from the coffee maker. Said nothing for a moment. "That's something," he said. "Yeah." He finished making the coffee and poured 2 cups and brought them to the table and sat down across from her. Through the window, the December light was coming in pale and cold and somehow beautiful. "You going to open that?" he said, nodding at the package. "In a minute." She wrapped her hands around her coffee. "Ray, can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "What made you stop?" She looked at him. "The things you used to do. The parts of your life that weren't right. What made you decide to change?" He thought about it. The thoughtful pause she'd come to look for. "Josie," he said, "when she got sick, I had to be present for something in a way I'd never been present for anything. Real, actual present. And I looked at my life and at what I was, and I thought—" He stopped. Started again. "She'd look at me like I was the whole world. Whatever I was, whatever I'd done, she looked at me and she saw more. Like those sparrows." He looked at his coffee. "When you're someone's whole world, you better be worth it." Viv opened the package. Inside was a set of watercolor paints. A good set. Not cheap, not elaborate, but good, the real thing, the kind that a person who took painting seriously would actually use. And beneath that, a small sketchbook. And beneath that, a book, Birds of North America, a field guide, with a bookmark already in the sparrow section. She looked at the things in the box for a long time. "I asked Christine," Ray said. "She knows about art supplies. She said that was a reasonable starting set." Viv picked up the book, opened it to the marked page. A sparrow looked back at her from the illustration, small and brown and, as you looked closer, breathtakingly intricate. "Thank you," she said. The words felt too small for what she meant. "Your mom taught you," Ray said. "Seems like the kind of thing you don't let go of." She pressed her hand flat on the open page, the sparrow underneath her palm, and felt something return to her that she'd thought she'd lost entirely. Not her mother, nothing as miraculous as that, but the sense of her. The sense of who her mother had been and what she'd loved and why it mattered. "Merry Christmas, Ray," she said. "Merry Christmas, Viv." January came in cold and purposeful. Viv fell into a rhythm at school that she hadn't expected to feel this quickly. Not comfortable exactly, but functional, the sense of purpose that comes with structure, with being somewhere you're supposed to be at a time you're supposed to be there. She was good at English. She'd always been good at English. Her history teacher, a tall man with an improbable name who went by Mr. P because nobody could pronounce his full last name correctly, noticed that she read carefully and asked questions with precision and began steering discussions her way with the particular subtlety of good teachers. She started painting again. The first thing she painted was the backyard of Ray's house. She sat at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with the watercolors Christine had recommended and the sketchbook Ray had given her, and she looked out the window at the small rectangle of winter yard, the leafless tree, the bird feeder Ray had set up sometime in December, the wooden fence, and she painted it. It took 3 hours. She threw away the first attempt and started over. The second attempt was better. She left it on the kitchen table for Ray to find. When he came home that evening, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at it for a long time. He picked it up and looked at it more closely. Set it down. Picked it up again. "This is good," he said. "It's okay," Viv said. "No," he said, in the same tone he'd used that first day when she'd said she didn't need charity, the tone that closed arguments. "This is good." He had it framed. She didn't find out until she saw it on the wall of the front hallway, a few weeks later, hung in a simple dark frame between two of Josie's photographs. She stood looking at it for a while. Her painting, between his daughter's photographs, on his wall. She didn't say anything. But when she turned around, Ray was standing at the end of the hall watching her with an expression that was quiet and complicated and full. In February, her father came. She'd talked to him on the phone every week since Christmas, sometimes briefly, just 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour or more. He was 73 days sober by then, and she could hear the difference in his voice, the gradual clearing, the way he was coming back to himself by degrees. He asked about school. She told him. He asked about the person she was staying with. She told him more each time. When he said he wanted to come and see her, her first instinct was fear. Not the dramatic fear of danger, but the smaller, more precise fear of having two parts of your life in the same room. The person you were before and the person you were becoming. She talked to Ray about it first. They'd developed a habit of talking in the evenings, after dinner, at the kitchen table, the conversations ranging over everything and nothing, sometimes about her day, sometimes about his, sometimes about larger things, the kind of things you only discuss with people who have earned the right to your larger thoughts. "I want him to come," she said. "I think I do. I'm just scared of what I'll feel when I see him." Ray considered this. "What's the worst thing you'd feel?" She thought about it. "That it's not enough. That he's trying, but I can still see the person who said those things to me. That I'll look at him and feel angry and hurt, and I won't be able to feel the love under it. And that I'll get those things mixed up, and I'll hurt him by accident. Or hurt myself." Ray wrapped his hands around his mug. "When Josie was sick," he said slowly, "I was angry at her doctor for months. Which didn't make any sense because the doctor was doing everything right. It was just, she was sick and someone had to carry the anger and he was there." Viv waited. "Your feelings about your dad are not going to be clean or simple or in the right order," Ray said. "You might love him and be furious at him at the same time. You might look at him and feel 5 things that contradict each other. That's not a problem. That's just being a person whose parent hurt them." "Does it get easier?" she asked. "Carrying the complicated things?" "It gets more familiar," he said. Same thing he'd said that first day about grief. "You stop fighting the weight of it. You get used to picking it up in the morning and setting it down at night. She called her father the next day. She told him to come. He arrived on a Saturday morning, ringing the doorbell with the particular hesitation of someone who isn't sure of their welcome. Ray opened the door, because Viv had asked him to be the first person her father saw, to set a tone, to be present in that specific way he was present, steady and non-threatening. Her father was thinner than she remembered. He'd always been a solid man, broad-shouldered, but grief and alcohol and then the hard work of recovery had taken something from his frame. He stood on the doorstep and took in Ray, the size of him, the jacket, the tattoos, and she saw him work through the obvious questions and set them aside. "You must be Ray," her father said. "I am," Ray said. "Come in. Coffee's on." They sat at the kitchen table, the mismatched chairs, the coffee, the winter light coming through the window, and it was not easy, but it was real, and real was the only currency that mattered at that table. Her father looked at her. She looked at him. Everything that needed to be said between them was too large for the first 5 minutes, so they talked about coffee and the drive down and whether the roads were icy, and all of that was just a vehicle for being in the same room, for letting the reality of the other person settle in. Ray made himself scarce after about 20 minutes. Not gone. She heard him in the back of the house, doing something that required mild banging that suggested productive activity, but absent from the kitchen, giving them space with the option of his presence nearby. She talked to her father for 3 hours. Not everything. Not the worst of it. The worst of it was going to take a long time, and maybe some of it would stay private forever, held between just them. But enough. She told him about the shelter and the nights in the parking garage and the 17 cents and the coffee shop and the man who'd answer her second ring at 12:30 in the morning and driven to get her in a snowstorm without making her feel small for asking. Her father listened without interrupting. When she was done talking, he was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was rough with everything that was running through it. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life being sorry," he said. "Not saying it every day. I know that gets hollow. Just being the kind of person who deserves to say it." 73 days, she said. 77 now. He almost smiled. "I started over when I realized I wasn't counting right." "Dad." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I love you. I am also furious at you, and that's probably not going to go away for a while. Both things are real at the same time." He looked at her hand over his. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I know." They were on the front porch at the end of the day, getting ready for him to drive back, when Ray came out with his hands in his jacket pockets, and her father squared up to him in the particular way men sometimes have of establishing themselves. "Thank you," her father said, "for what you did for my daughter." Ray looked at him steadily. "She did most of it herself," he said. "Toughest person in any room she walks into, your kid. You should know that about her." Her father's jaw worked. "I do know that," he said. "She got that from her mother." "Then her mother raised her right," Ray said. "And so did you, even if it got lost for a while." Her father nodded slowly, looked at Viv, looked back at Ray, extended his hand. They shook. Spring came slowly, the way it does in that part of the world, not arriving so much as edging in, a degree warmer each week, the lights staying longer each day in increments so gradual you almost missed them. Viv's grades climbed. She was honest with herself about the fact that some of it was the stability, the difference between doing homework in a library or a parking garage versus doing it at a quiet desk in a room with a lamp and a door that locked. But some of it was also her, the part of her that her mother had always said was tenacious, which her mother had meant as a compliment, though it had taken Viv a long time to receive it that way. She started sitting with a girl named Rosario in English class. Rosario was small and loud, and had an opinion about everything, and the particular social bravery of someone who decided not to care what people thought of her, which Viv found alternately exhausting and inspiring. They became friends the way you do at 17. Suddenly, completely, the way a lock opens. She told Rosario about the last year gradually, over weeks. Rosario listened with the intensity she brought to everything and cried twice, which she did unabashedly and without apology, which Viv found she loved. "This Ray person," Rosario said one afternoon. They were at the iron door. Viv had brought her there, introduced her to Georgie, who'd immediately tried to feed her 3 things before she'd even sat down. "He just, what, he took you in? Like out of nowhere?" "Not out of nowhere," Viv said. "He paid for my hot chocolate. That's basically out of nowhere." "Maybe." Viv looked around the diner. Georgie was arguing cheerfully with Bobby about something. At the counter, a man she didn't know was eating soup in the careful way of someone who hadn't eaten a real meal in a while, and Georgie kept refilling his coffee without being asked. "He didn't rescue me," Viv said. "That's not what happened. He just kept showing up. He made it possible for me to do things myself." Rosario considered this. "That's actually better than being rescued." "Yeah," Viv said. "It is." In April, she painted her mother. She'd been working up to it for months, had circled around it in other paintings: the backyard, the tree in front of the school, a series of small canvases with birds that she'd started to develop as her own thing, her own continuation of something her mother had begun. But painting her mother directly had felt too large, too final, too much like completing a sentence she wasn't sure she could finish. She did it one Saturday afternoon in April when Ray was out, and the house was quiet, and the light through the window was doing something particular and golden that reminded her of the kitchen of her childhood home. She painted from memory. Her mother at the kitchen table, the way she'd always sat, sideways in the chair, one knee up, reading or writing, head tilted slightly. She painted the particular set of her shoulders, the way her hair fell, the hand that always held a pen or a brush, always moving, always making something. It took most of the afternoon. She finished at 5:30 and sat back and looked at it, and it wasn't perfect. The face was slightly off, slightly more general than she'd wanted, but it was her mother. It was enough of her mother to be grief and love in equal measure. She heard Ray's truck in the driveway, heard him come in the front door, move through the house. He came to the kitchen doorway and stopped. She was still sitting at the table, looking at the painting. She heard him come into the kitchen and pull out the chair across from her and sit down. For a long time, neither of them said anything. "She looks kind," Ray said finally. "She was," Viv said. "She was the kindest person I've ever known." "She'd be proud of you," Ray said. "For the last year. For all of it." "I don't know," Viv said honestly. "I think she'd be proud of some of it, and she'd have a lot to say about the rest." "That's what good mothers do," Ray said. Viv laughed. It came out surprised, genuine, slightly wet with tears. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, it is." May brought Josie's birthday. May 3rd. Ray had told her about it in passing, mentioned it the way he mentioned most things about Josie, without making a production, without asking for anything specific, just letting it exist in the air between them the way important things do. She spent 2 weeks on a painting. She worked from a photograph, one Ray had let her look at, a photograph of Josie at about 11, sitting on the back of Ray's motorcycle with both arms raised like she was flying. She painted it in watercolor, which was harder than oil for the reflective surfaces of the bike, but which created a particular quality of light that she thought was right for the subject. She gave it to Ray the morning of May 3rd. Left it on the kitchen table before he was awake, leaning against the coffee maker with a note that just said, "For Josie," who was worth looking at closely. She heard him come downstairs at 7. Heard him stop. She was in her room. She stayed there, giving him the quiet he needed. But she heard him, just for a moment, just briefly, and the sound of a man with more grief in him than most people carry made something in her chest ache in a way that was also, somehow, a kind of love. He didn't mention it until dinner that evening. He came home with takeout from a Thai place she liked, which was how he sometimes said things without saying them. They ate at the table and she waited. "The painting," he said. "Where Josie is. With the light on the chrome." "Yeah," she said. "That's the best thing I own," he said. She looked at her food. Blinked twice. "Good," she managed. Ray picked up his fork. Set it down. Looked at her. "I want you to know something," he said. And he said it in the voice he saved for the things that mattered most, the voice that was quieter than usual and more deliberate. "What we've got here, what this year has been. I don't want you to ever think I did it because I needed to fill a space. Because Josie's gone and I was looking for something to replace what I lost." Viv looked at him. "I didn't take you in," he said. "I offered you warmth when you were cold and you made everything else happen yourself. The school and the dad and the painting and the making a friend." He met her eyes. "What I want to tell you is that you are yourself. Not a substitute for anyone. You are Vivian Cole and you're irritating when you're right about things, and you eat more cereal than any person I've ever known, and you leave watercolor brushes on every surface in this house. And you're one of the best people I've met in my life. That's true on its own. It's not a comparison to anything." She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. "You leave motorcycle parts on the porch," she said finally. "That's also a thing that happens." He almost smiled. "Fair point, Ray." She looked at him. "You know you didn't just help me, right? You know this helped you too." He was quiet. "It's okay if it did," she said. "It's okay if we helped each other. That's not a lesser thing. That's maybe the best version of what this could be." He picked up his fork, ate a bite of food, looked out the window at the spring evening, the yard starting to go green. "Yeah," he said. "Okay. Yeah." The summer was the summer. Long days and the smell of mowed grass and the particular generosity of a world that has finally stopped being winter. Viv worked 3 shifts a week at the Iron Door, bussing tables, learning the rhythms of the place, who came in at what time, who needed extra coffee before they could speak, who needed the back booth because the front was too loud, who was new and needed the particular welcome that Georgie dispensed as naturally as breathing. She'd been worried, when Georgie offered her the job, that it would change the place for her. That working somewhere stripped away the comfort of it. But it turned out to be the opposite. Knowing the inside of a place, knowing how it worked, made you trust it more. She started doing small paintings for the diner. Not commissioned, she just started doing them, 3 by 5 inch watercolors of the things she saw, and she'd leave them with Georgie. A sparrow on the windowsill. A coffee mug in particular light. A pair of hands wrapped around a bowl. Georgie put them up in a row along the wall above the counter, and she never made a big deal of them, just hung them, and customers would look at them sometimes, and the ones who asked were told a girl named Viv did them. One Saturday in July, a woman came in specifically because she'd seen one of the paintings through the window. She was a professional, she explained. She ran a small gallery downtown. She'd seen the sparrow painting from the street and had come in to look at it more closely, and now she wanted to know who the artist was. Georgie called Viv out from the back where she was stacking cups. Viv stood in front of this woman and her painting and felt the strange vertiginous feeling of being seen all the way through. "How old are you?" the woman asked. 17, Viv said. "Almost 18. The woman looked at the painting and then at Viv and then back at the painting. "You painted this from life?" "From a window," Viv said. "I look at them when they come to the feeder." "Do you have other work?" She did have other work. The kitchen table landscapes. Her mother. The street scene she'd done in March, all cold air and long shadows. A series of bird studies she'd been developing, not copies from the field guide, but her own versions, her own interpretation of what she saw, which was turning out to be something different from simply accurate. She brought the woman home that afternoon. Ray was there, out on the front porch with a cup of coffee and a newspaper, and he looked up when they came up the walk, and he read the situation immediately, not from the woman's professional look or Viv's barely contained agitation, but from the way Viv held herself, which he'd learned to read the way you learn any language you care about. He stood up, extended a hand. "Ray Stafford. Ellen Marsh." The woman shook his hand and looked at him with the particular equanimity of someone who has learned not to make quick judgments. They went inside. Viv spread her work out on the kitchen table, not the whole of it, a selection, the ones she thought were strongest, and stood back and watched Ellen Marsh look at them. It took about 5 minutes of silence. "This one," Ellen Marsh said, pointing at the painting of Viv's mother. "Tell me about this one." "My mother," Viv said. "She died last year." Ellen Marsh looked at her. Looked at the painting. "You painted this from memory?" "Yes." "The grief in it is very controlled," Ellen said. "That's technically difficult. Most painters, when they're working through loss, lose control of the containment. They go too far in one direction. The feeling overwhelms the craft, or the craft tries to suppress the feeling. You've held them in balance." Viv hadn't thought about it in those terms. She nodded slowly. "I'd like to offer you a show," Ellen Marsh said. "A small show, 6-8 pieces. In October. Nothing huge. But you should be working with an audience." Viv stood very still. "I'm 17, she said. "I know," Ellen said. I was 34 before I showed my first work. There's no minimum age for being ready. She looked at Ray. He was leaning against the counter with his coffee, and he gave her the small, particular nod that she'd learned meant, "This is yours. I'm right here if you need me, but this is yours." "I'd need to think about it," Viv said. "Can I have a few days?" "Of course," Ellen Marsh said. After she left, Ray sat at the kitchen table and looked at the paintings spread out across it. "What are you thinking?" he said. "I'm thinking that my mom would have completely lost her mind," Viv said. She sat down across from him. "In the best possible way. I'm thinking that she would have cried and then immediately started calling people to tell them." "Yeah," Ray said. "Yeah." She looked at the painting of her mother. "I'm thinking she'd say, 'You did this, Viv. You are the one who did this.' And she'd mean it." Ray put his coffee down. "She'd be right." "I know," Viv said. "I know she'd be right." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "I'm going to do it." The show was in October. She painted all summer and into September, working with an intentionality she'd never had before. Not working toward a goal, exactly, but working toward a coherence, a sense of what she was saying and why. The series that emerged was 12 paintings, though she only used 8 for the show: the sparrow in winter, the kitchen table in morning light, her mother, the parking garage at night, which she'd wrestled with for weeks because the painting was technically about homelessness, but she didn't want it to be about pity. She wanted it to be about the particular alert consciousness of someone trying to stay safe in an unsafe place, the awareness, the attentiveness that hardship teaches. The backyard of Ray's house in all 4 seasons, compressed into one painting through a particular compositional choice that Ellen thought was the strongest in the collection. A biker's hands, Ray's hands, though she didn't say so in the title, wrapped around a coffee mug. Rosario, laughing, at the iron door. And a bird in flight, brown and common and, if you looked closely, infinitely complex. The title she gave the show was People I Didn't Expect. The opening was on a Friday evening in October, and she'd told almost no one because she was terrified. And then at the last minute she told Ray and Rosario and Georgie and Walter and Christine and her father, who drove 3 hours to be there. She stood at the back of the gallery and watched people come in and look at her work, and it was one of the most frightening and most extraordinary things she'd ever experienced. People stood in front of paintings she'd made in Ray's kitchen, in her room, at the diner, and they looked at them, and she could see from across the room when something happened, when a painting reached someone, when it found something. Ray stood in front of the painting of his hands for a long time. She came to stand beside him. "You didn't tell me you were painting me," he said. "I wasn't sure how you'd feel about it." He looked at the hands in the painting. His hands, recognizable if you knew them, their particular size and shape, and the tattoos visible along the knuckle line. In the painting, the hands were wrapped around a coffee mug, and the light on them was warm. "The title," he said. The painting was called The Thing He Offered. "It's what you did," she said. "You offered things. The hot chocolate, your jacket, the room, the card, your number. You kept extending things toward me without asking anything back." He looked at the painting for another moment. "I got plenty back," he said. "I know." She looked at it too. "But you didn't know you would. You did it before you knew." Her father appeared beside her, on the other side from Ray, and she was briefly between the two men who'd hurt her and saved her most this year, which was its own complete and complicated truth. "Vivian," her father said. She could hear everything he meant by just her name. "I know, Dad," she said. "I know." He put his arm around her shoulders, carefully, asking permission in the gesture. She leaned into him slightly. On her other side, Ray didn't move or speak. Just stood there with his coffee, her painting of his hands in front of him, being present in the way he'd always been present. The three of them stood there in the October light and looked at the painting, and it was enough, and it was everything, and it was exactly what her mother would have painted if she'd been there. Afterward, when most of the guests had gone and it was just the people she'd invited, Rosario, Georgie, Walter, Christine, Ray, her father, they stood in the gallery and Ellen Marsh opened a bottle of sparkling cider because Viv was still 17 and Ellen Marsh apparently observed this distinction, and they raised their glasses in the gallery surrounded by the 8 paintings. "To Viv," Rosario said, because she was the kind of person who said things directly without waiting for anyone to be ready. "To Viv," everyone said. She looked at them, at the faces, at the people she hadn't expected. She thought about a morning in November of the previous year, when she'd walked into a coffee shop with 17 cents and no plan and a chin she'd had to practice holding up. She thought about the moment she'd been about to turn around. She'd almost turned around, had been standing in the warmth of the doorway counting the occupied tables, calculating her options, deciding she didn't belong, when a voice behind her had said, "Give her a large hot chocolate." She thought about 4 seconds of deciding. She thought about how much can change in a year. Not that it fixes or erases or resolves. A year doesn't do that. 2 years doesn't do that. Perhaps nothing fully does that. But it can accumulate. It can add weight on the other side of the scale, not to counterbalance the loss, but to sit beside it, and in the sitting beside to show that there is more, that there is always more if you stay long enough for it. She thought about her mother and sparrows. She looked at Ray, who was holding his cider glass and looking at the painting of his hands, and was aware, she thought, that she was looking at him, because he turned and met her eyes, and she saw in his the same thing she always saw there, the steady, undemanding presence of someone who had decided she was worth being present for. "I want to tell you something," she said. Not to the group, to him specifically, though the others were there, and that was okay. "Yeah," he said. "Last November," she said, "I had 17 cents. I'd been outside for 3 weeks. I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be okay." She paused. "I walked into that coffee shop and I stood in the doorway and I almost turned around because I couldn't figure out why I would belong anywhere. I'd done the thing where you add up every reason you don't belong somewhere and the list gets so long you can't see past it." Ray was very still. "And then I heard your voice," she said. "And you didn't tell me why I belonged. You just moved. You made space. You ordered me something hot and you pulled out a chair and you said sit down. Like it was obvious. Like there was no question of whether I'd fit." She looked at her glass. "I want to tell you that I know what that cost," she said. "The risk of it. Bringing a stranger into your orbit. Into your house, eventually. Into Josie's room." She looked up at him. "I know you didn't do it because you were certain it would be fine. You did it because you decided it was worth doing, regardless." Ray put his cider down on the gallery table. He cleared his throat, which was something he only did when something had gotten past his considerable defenses. "You were worth doing for," he said. His voice was rough. "So were you," she said. "So were you, Ray." He looked at her. She looked at him. Around them, the quiet low sounds of Rosario talking to Georgie, of her father speaking softly with Christine, of Walter making some observation to Ellen Marsh about one of the paintings. "I want to ask you something," Viv said. "Okay." "When I graduate," she said, "and when I go to college, because I'm going to college, I've decided. On the art program, I've already looked it up. I'm going to apply this spring." "Good," Ray said simply. "When I do all of that," she continued, "I want to know that this, what we are, I want to know that doesn't end." He looked at her for a long moment, seemed to be working through something, not the words but the shape of them, the right way to hold what he felt. "Viv," he said, "I have a photograph of Josie on the wall. I have a painting you made of my backyard. I have a drawing Josie made of a bird and a painting you made of a bird, and they're in the same room." He picked up his glass. "You're part of my life. The permanent kind. Not because you owe me anything. Not because I'm trying to replace anything. Because you sat down and I paid for a hot chocolate, and the next year happened, and now," he stopped. "Started again. Now I have 2 artists in my house, even if one of them is gone. And the other one is going to be famous, and I'm going to tell everyone I knew her when she had 17 cents. She laughed. She couldn't help it. The laugh came out of some full, warm place that had been nearly empty a year ago. "Rosario says I'm going to be famous," she said. "She's been saying it for months." "Smart friend," Ray said. "She's relentless," Viv said. "It's terrifying." He raised his glass. She raised hers. They clinked, and around them the people who mattered kept talking and laughing in the October gallery, surrounded by paintings of sparrows and hands and kitchens, and a girl's grief and a man's hands, and the particular complex reality of common things seen closely. Later, months later, when she was 17 and then 18, when she was applying to college and finishing school and painting and working 3 shifts at the diner and talking to her father twice a week and watching him get to 90 days and 150 and then a year of sobriety, she would try to identify the moment when things changed. When the year of cold and loss and 17 cents became something with a different shape. She could never find just one moment. That was the thing she came to understand. It wasn't the hot chocolate or the room or the phone call at midnight or the Christmas morning or the show. It was all of it together, the accumulation, the daily unglamorous work of one person extending a hand and another person taking it, and both of them being changed by the exchange. She painted a series later that year for her college portfolio. 12 small pieces, each one a hand. Different hands, different contexts, the gesture of offering or receiving or simply being open. The series was called Extending. The last piece in the series was the simplest. 2 hands, one large and weathered and tattooed, one small and fine-boned, not touching but close. Between them, a small brown bird in mid-flight, going somewhere. She thought her mother would have loved it. She thought Josie would have loved it. She thought Ray, when he saw it on the wall of her first proper studio, a rented room on the 3rd floor of a building downtown, a room that smelled like turpentine and had good north light, would put it in that category of things he didn't say much about because there wasn't much to say. The kind of thing you just stood in front of for a while and let be true. She thought about sitting down. She thought about a chair pulled out with the particular certainty of someone who has decided you belong in it. She thought about the word sit, which means be here, you have a right to be here, this warmth is for you too. She thought about the morning she'd walked into a coffee shop with 17 cents and almost turned around. She was glad she hadn't turned around. She was glad, every day, that she'd found the courage to cross a room and accept a cup of something warm from a stranger who turned out to be the opposite of a stranger, who turned out to be someone her life had been moving toward without her knowing, the way rivers move toward the sea without knowing what the sea will be. She was glad for the 17 cents and the bandana folded in thirds and the card that said R. Stafford and the key on a plain ring and the blueberry muffin and the spare room and the watercolors and the painting of hands on a wall. She was glad for all the small extensions of warmth that together add up to something that deserves a better word than charity and a better word than rescue and perhaps only this one: love. The ordinary, unglamorous, consistent, showing up kind. The kind that pulls out a chair and says sit down and means it. The kind that changes everything.